This is Ellouise Schoettler, a storyteller from her home for today. I hope all's well with you. We haven't been in contact with with new stuff, uh, for before Christmas. It's nice to be back. I hope you've had a good time. Although our good times in these days are confused, aren't they? At least my life is. I'm not going around in many places. I'm making the fun at my house. And I'm cleaning up my house. There are many things to be done. One of the things that's the biggest change for me is, did you notice my hair? I've never had hair this long. This is my pandemic hair. And I see people all the time that have this long, sort of non curly hair, and you can't go anywhere and get it fixed because I'm not going to take a chance that I'm going to pick up the COVID COVID that way, by being in a strange place. I've talked to a lot of people. I hope you're calling people that you've known in the past or yesterday or whatever that you want to have a conversation with, that you've called them and talked to them. I find that so wonderful to be talking to people that I went to school with. It's really exciting to catch the past, and you don't have to ask very much because as soon as you talk to somebody that you knew for a long time, even if it was a long time ago, there's a reconnection with a friend. I've found that box. I made little notes. You'll never hear of those little notes, but I kept little notes. I have a story to tell. Going to do that in just 1 second. It's not a usual story when you've got history being made all around you, when you've been in the history a week or a little more than that, you've been in that history. Of course, if you're watching your television, which I do when stuff starts happening, then you've been in the history because you know what happened and whatever. Well, I'm not telling you a story about that. I'm telling you a story that I learned when I went to Africa. And it's a story that I keep in my heart and in my head. See what you think. The name of this story is The Cowtail Switch. There was a man who lived in a small village away from too many villages. He was in a place, a hut, with his wife who was expecting another baby, and he already had 5 sons. They lived in this house, they had 5 sons. It was going to be a change to have a son again because his sons were not adults, but they were pushing on toward that. They were a happy family. They were. And she was happy with her new baby coming. One morning he looked out, the weather was good, the skies were beautiful, and he reached up on the wall and he took down his implements, his weapons, And he said, I'm going hunting this morning. And his son said, can we come with you? And he said, no, no, I will do this by myself. You finish in the gardens. Get that work done. And he picked up his weapons, his hunter's weapons, and he went across until he disappeared into the jungle. Well, everyone expected him to be home for supper, but he didn't come. Something must have happened, or he was having a success. And so the next day, they were all looking forward to seeing him and seeing what he had done and what had worked. And he went off. And he didn't come back that night. And there was some worry beginning. With a woman who has a new baby in her body, 5 sons. He didn't come the next day. And every day his sons got up and they looked out and they walked around as far as they could go. And then they came back and went back to work. And that became a day. And he worked. But Ogalusa did not come back. And the weeks piled up. And the first thing you know, it was months. They weren't talking about Ogalusa as much. They weren't worrying about him as much. It'd been months. And he wasn't back. The baby was born. It was a boy, another boy. Looked like a happy boy. It looked like it was going to be just an eager, energetic boy, and that's what he was. They named him Pooley. And Pooley grew well. He grew up and he looked around and he was watching everybody. And first he finally got up on his knees so that he could move around. Older. And then after more months, he began to talk. First, just sounds, a word or two, and then another month, and all those words came together into a sentence. And he looked at his mother, and he looked at his brothers, and he said, "Where is my father?" Well, they were quite taken back. They were surprised. But of course, he was living in a village where they had many fathers. They had young boys and old boys, and they had many fathers. And he looked around at his brothers and he said, "Where is my father?" And his brothers looked back and said, "I don't know. We don't know. We haven't looked far enough, have we? We haven't looked hard enough." And they took down their weapons and they went out across the way, a long, long way down a road, and then off to another set, and then back on a road and back in the same direction. And after 2 days, they entered an opening, and weapons lay on the ground. And they looked over at them, and they were Ogalusa's weapons. And then they moved around, and they looked, and they moved. Any greens or anything that had fallen on the road, and they found a pile of bones. Bones and weapons was all that was there. And they looked at each other and thought, "What can we do? What can we do?" And the older boy said, "Help me. I'm going to fix our father." And they gathered up the bones into one pile, and they began to rearrange them, to put them in order so that the shape, the head to the foot, the shape of their father reappeared. And then another brother stepped up and said, "I will give them skin." And he did. Somehow he gave them skin and put those bones together so that it looked like their father there, a man shape there. And then one of the other brothers came forward and he looked and he leaned down and he breathed deeply into his father's face. And he began to move his chest back and forth. He had given him breath to breathe. And then he gave him blood to warm his body, to give him something. And the last one came forth and gave him something. They weren't sure what, but it was the energy and just the willingness to speak. And Ogalusa sat up and he looked around at his sons. "Where am I?" And they didn't answer, but he looked around and he didn't need an answer. He said, "Where are my weapons?" And they handed him his weapons. And he held out his hand and he reached up and he stood up and he said, "Let's go home." Well, they did. They walked together with their taller father in their group, and they walked together back to the village and back to their home. His wife was overjoyed. She was so startled, she was overjoyed. And he walked in, and there was Pooley, the little boy, the young boy, 3 years old, the young boy. And he reached over to hold his father's hand. "You are my father." "Yes." She fixed him a bath, and he went in and got into a tub of water, and he cleaned himself, and he just rested in the water. And when he got out, he warmed up, he dried himself off, he put a clothes on, and then he sat down to eat with his family. And he did that for 4 days. He didn't go out of his hut. He stayed in his hut. He was back from the land of dead. He was back from the land of the dead. And he knew what to do. He was an older man. He knew what to do. So he stayed in the house for 4 days. And then he went out and he bought a cow. And he killed that cow and cut the tail off. And then he said to his sons, "Help me move this. We'll build a pit. We'll put the rods up so that we can roast this cow. And we'll celebrate with the people in the town." And he did that. And they had a celebration. And he walked around. He had decorated that tail. And he held it. And he moved it. And every person in the town came up and said, "It's beautiful, it's beautiful, give it to me." And he said, "No." And he went to the front, in front of his friends, and he stood there and he said, "I'm back. And here's my Cowtail Switch. And I'm going to give it to one of my sons. But it'll have to be the one that did the most to bring me home." And they talked about it and they fought about it. And he told, "I did this and I did that." Finally, he looked at them and he took the switch and he had it in his hand. And he went over to Pooley and he handed him the switch. "My son Pooley did the most to bring me back because he asked about me. He asked where I was." Everybody was quiet. Everybody knew. They knew what they all knew, that no man is dead as long as he is not forgotten. I love that story from the first time I ever saw it. It helped me to stick my head into ancestry history and to learn about my family. Think about it for yours and for history and for what we want. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.